Hello everyone, it's BYG Agami back with another video. Now today we're going to be doing my Yu-Gi-Oh! The Dark Side Dimensions spoiler-filled spoiler review on this movie. Now I did a spoiler-free review on this movie, I'll link it down below, but let's jump right into it. The first thing I want to talk about is the visuals, and this is very important. You could tell Studio Gala put a lot of time in this movie simply because the movie did not look bad at all whatsoever. Even the theater that I was at, it was complete shit. The projector wasn't as big as a normal one, and you could still see how beautiful and how detailed Dark Side Dimensions was. Like, everything about this movie in terms of visuals was just spot on. Even with the clips that 4K Media released, such as the reanimated scene and we get to see Slifer, he just looked beautiful. And also when I got to see Obelisk as well. I think Obelisk and then Deep Eyes White Dragon were the most detailed monsters throughout that movie. Like, when we get to see Obelisk during the Aigami versus Kaiba duel, and I'll talk about that in my duel breakdown, you just see how freaking detailed Obelisk was. He was CGI, of course, but the fact is that it was just flawless. Like, it really looked flawless. And there's this one shot when Obelisk is getting summoned. You see Kaiba's face, you see Obelisk's face, and it was just so detailed and colorful, and it was really goddamn scary. Especially when Kaiba delivers a Fist of Fury to Aigami, just the hand itself was so detailed. So you guys know my stance on how it looks visually. Let's get on to the voice acting. The voice acting was very good. Most of the characters did a really nice job. There are a few characters that, to be honest, did an impressive job. And you know who these people are. Kaiba did an impressive job. Eric Stewart, Wayne Grayson, Greg Abbey, I also think did an impressive job. Daniel J. Edwards did an impressive job as well. And one nitpick that I had about this movie was that Sarah sounded a little bit too old. And the fact is that you'd look at Sarah, you can look at her height, you can look at her age. Like, if she had a little bit more of a childish and less mature voice, I would have enjoyed the voice a little bit more, but I enjoy the character a lot. Let's actually talk about Sarah and her role in this movie. Sarah's role in this movie is that she's trying to help out her brother Aigami. The thing with Aigami is that his character is very confused. He's going in this whole aspect of fear. And Sarah even states it several times throughout the movie that Aigami, what you're doing is wrong. You're going with fear. You're going with your emotions. You're not thinking properly. Out of the trio of her, Aigami, and Manny, she's not confused. Her motives are very correct and they're positive. What she's basically trying to do is to save her brother. And she does a good job on doing that, because in the movie where she does stuff behind her brother's back just to save him. And that scene is basically where during the graduation practice, Yugi was basically giving his graduation speech, and then we see Aigami in the background, and then Sarah comes in and Aigami gives Sarah the piece of the Millennium Puzzle. Aigami entrusts Sarah with it, and then what Sarah does is later on in the movie, Yugi's building his deck and getting ready for that tournament that he's having with Aigami, Bakura, Tristan, and Joey. Sarah comes in and gives Yugi that piece of the puzzle, and Aigami doesn't know about that, and then Aigami gets kidnapped. And Mokuba's like, oh, we're 2 steps ahead of you. We already know where the other puzzle piece is. Because Aigami had one puzzle piece, and that's in his Quantum Cube or his Millennium Cube. They don't know how to extract it from the Millennium Cube. And Aigami's initial response to them is that, you should be cooperating with me since I know how to get it out of the Millennium Cube. But then Mokuba, as I said before, said that whole, oh, we're 2 steps ahead of you. We already know where the other Millennium puzzle piece is. And they projected a picture of Sarah up, and Aigami was flipped. He's like, oh no. And the fact is that he couldn't talk with his sister. And a scene prior to that, Aigami gets kidnapped by Kaiba Corporation's men. And what they basically do is they use a deprivation mask on Aigami so he can't talk to the piranhas mentally, which is smart. This is only something Kaiba would think of. So Sarah constantly brings up that she has to save her brother. And we also get a lot of the information about their cult called the Piranhas through her. She's basically the main source. We also get a lot of information through Aigami as well. But it's basically her and then Shin, who I will be revealing later on throughout this spoiler review. The second person out of the trio is Mani. Now Mani, he has a decent role in this movie. His role isn't as relevant as Sarah or Aigami's is, and he basically gets the short end of the stick out of both of them. Mani's important role throughout this movie is basically getting possessed by the Millennium Ring, because during the Kaiba and Aigami duel, Aigami leaves, of course. He's trying to get the Millennium puzzle pieces from Mokuba. Mani's still there, and he sees the Millennium Ring and he touches it, and I think it teleports him into a different dimension. And Mani's like all corrupt and shit. And then he comes back later on throughout the movie. And the scene where he comes in is when Aigami basically puts Joey in a dimension, and basically that reality consists of Joey's memories. Aigami's basically commentating in Joey's mind saying, Joey, do you remember your first laugh? Do you remember the first time you did this? Do you remember this, that? Because basically it's his memories. That whole world runs on Joey's memories. And once Aigami erases all of Joey's memories, because Joey's running and everything's dissolving, basically hinting towards the fact that his memory's about to get erased, then he's gonna die. And Joey doesn't die because, and this hit my heart so much, Joey doesn't die because he thinks of one everlasting memory, and that's friendship, and that's also Atim. Atim comes in, and of course that's not the real Atim, that's from Joey's memories. Alright guys, note that's not the real Atim, that's from Joey's memories. And what that Atim does is, somehow from friendship, it blocks the powers of the Pranas, even the Prana members, because prior to that there's a scene of Bakura and Aigami meeting, and Aigami wants revenge on Bakura because Bakura technically killed Master Shin in that individual Ashadi. And this is crazy. This was like a whole 180 plot twist type of thing, because they talked about Master Shin a lot, and it wasn't until Yugi meets up with Sierra at the Kame shop and she talks about Shadi Shin, their master, and that's when we get that whole backstory on the Pranas. But basically Bakura has this flashback with Aigami in it because Aigami was there, and prior to that we get information that Bakura's father was an antique collector and they lived in Egypt before settling down in Domino. So the flashback consists of Shadi in the Shrine of the Millennium Stone, or where the ceremonial battle took place, and he says that when all 7 Millennium items return here, you guys will get your power, but if the Pharaoh does come back, then you guys will lose your powers. And that's basically one of Aigami's motivations. I'm going to do a whole video talking about Aigami's motivations, but one of his motivations is that he wants to keep his powers, or he wants to keep the Prana's powers as a whole. But while Shadi's talking to them, he talks about this whole fear and hatred, about how children can understand things better than adults can, and that a child's judgment has not been consumed by hate and fear. And the thing is, this is an innocent Aigami that got rescued by Shadi. Diva, and that's Aigami's real name, we get that early on in the damn movie during the Kaiba versus Aigami duel. I think even before that possibly. Little Diva's like, when I'm with you, I don't feel hate and fear. And then Shadi's like, the way you're thinking of is wrong because there's gonna be a time when I'm gone. And the fact is that he was gone in 2 minutes right after he said that, which is kinda sad, but this was sort of the spark that set off Aigami's character. And how Shadi dies is that Bakura's father comes in and he looks at the Millennium Ring, or the Shrine of the Millennium Stone, and he sees that there's 2 items in it. I think it was the skill, and I know for a fact it was the Millennium Ring. But basically Bakura's father runs in and he's like, oh, the ancient book was talking about there being like an eye or something like that inside this object. And Shadi's like, children, move back. And basically in the scene, Bakura's father wants the Millennium Ring. Shadi even states that he doesn't know the full powers of the Millennium Ring. Basically, Shadi states to Bakura's father that you can't choose it, it calls to you. And Bakura's father picks up the ring and puts it on his neck, and it just shakes, and skulls just start coming out of nowhere, and it pushes him away. And Bakura's father's about to die, and Bakura runs up to him. Bakura's father says to his son, where's the ring? And his final words are basically shit to his son. He just talks about the ring. He has such obsession with the ring, which basically led to his son's fate for like 4 or 5 years, which was being possessed by the Millennium Ring. Bakura puts on the Millennium Ring, and we see Yami Bakura. We see a young Yami Bakura in the evil inside the Millennium Ring, and Yami Bakura throws like this spirit ball or ki blast, whatever you want to call it, that basically blows Shadi all the way, and he dies. And Aigami's looking at him. Aigami's crying. He's just sad. And Shadi's like, you're taking up the powers of the Prana, and gives him the Millennium Cube. And I'm talking so heavily about this because it's important to the story. And I'm not going to go fully in depth about each scene of the movie, but I'm just going to be talking about key parts. And this is where the spark happens. This is why Aigami has such a evil, corrupt look at life. It's because of Shadi dying and Bakura killing him. The fact that Bakura killed Shadi sets off a lot of the reasons in this movie. And also Atim returning. But talking a little bit about Atim saving Joey through the memory scene, what I liked about this scene is that they played the old nostalgic, the dub theme, when Grandpa in episode 1 titled The Heart of the Cards couldn't handle Kaiba Corporation's hologram system. So he was in the hospital, and Taya was like, Yugi, let's draw this friendship symbol. And they all draw it, and they played that doo-doo, and they were playing that in the back of DSOD, and man, my face lit up with just a pure smile. Man, like what they did about this movie, and this sort of off topic from the plot, but it's good. 4K Media did this. This is what they did. 4K Media did this formula where they kept key points of the Japanese story, did a lot of nostalgic things, and added their own taste. And I liked this rendition that 4K Media gave for Yu-Gi-Oh! The Dark Side Dimensions. So I think I'm going a little bit too much into Aigami's character because there's a lot to talk about. Of course, I'll talk about it in other videos, but let's get on to Yugi's character. Now, Yugi's character basically gets shoved into this movie. It's mostly about Kaiba and Aigami. Yugi sort of enters in because Kaiba wants to revive a Tim, and Aigami doesn't want Kaiba to revive a Tim. So Yugi does a good job in this movie. There are some scenes where we see Yugi looking back and he's kind of sad that Atim's not there. But at the end of the film, during the Kaiba versus Yugi duel, he says that you have to move on, Kaiba. I did. What I liked about Yugi in this movie is that he was content with the Tim going on, and we get to see him go on as well. Like he thought about a Tim a little bit, but it wasn't as much as I thought it would be every other scene in the movie. Well, it really wasn't. It was mostly Kaiba. I'm going to talk about the Kaiba and the Tim relationship later on in this review. There's this one scene where Yugi and Ko are looking for Bakura, and they all start going their separate ways, and Yugi bumps into Kaiba, and this is after Kaiba, I'm pretty sure, kidnaps Aigami. Yugi sees Kaiba, and Kaiba's like, you're gonna come to the tournament and we're gonna have our duel, and he's like, I know you have the piece of the Millennium Puzzle. Yugi's like, why are you doing this? Kaiba's like, to prove I'm the greatest. Kaiba's main motive throughout this movie is that he wants to defeat a Tim in a duel, while in the sub version it's more than that. One little line that I like that Kaiba said was, Kaiba says to Yugi, Yugi, I know you want to see him as well. And that really is true, but at the same time, it's not true because Yugi sort of moves on. He doesn't want to see a Tim, but we all know for a fact that he wants to see a Tim. One particular scene of Yugi's that I like is before the tournament's about to happen with Kaiba, Yugi, and Aigami. Kaiba and Aigami are gonna duel first, and Yugi is like, no, I want to duel Aigami. And Kaiba's like, this is my tournament, and which is kind of funny because it's true. And Yugi's like, no, I have to fight for something, and that reason is because he took my friend Bakura. And Aigami's like, yeah, go for it. And I'm going to talk about a Tim later on, probably the end of the movie. But one more thing I do want to talk about for Aigami is that the Daniel J. Edwards just does an amazing job. Dan Green does an amazing job. Voice acting's not a problem for this movie at all. They all did an impressive job, and that's not even being biased as a Yu-Gi-Oh fan, especially as a 4K Media fan or 4Kids fan. I'm just not being biased. It's just facts, alright? But the particular thing that I want to talk about for Aigami is that he does a good job in blending in with Yugi. Like, he gives off that persona that he's a weak person, but in reality he's a confident being. Like, he murked the Kutaragi gang. He wasn't playing around. Even though he probably could have sent them in a different dimension, he just killed them. That's how freaking badass Aigami is. In Daniel J. Edwards' performance, as on top of the whole Aigami persona, Daniel J. Edwards does an amazing job. At first I was like, I don't know about this voice, but dude, he does, like, when Aigami's sad, he does an impressive job. When Aigami's mad, he does an impressive job. When Aigami tries to blend in and give off that false persona that he's some weak person, he does an amazing job. And I'm sorry I can't go into everything about this movie. It's just because that would take too long, and I want to make this review a little bit watchable. So I'm going to probably do 15 to 10 more minutes talking about a few other things. And another thing that I want to talk about is the duels. The duels look visually pleasing. Sometimes the dueling doesn't make sense, particularly the Kaiba versus Aigami duel, which I will do an explanation video on because I think I know how he summoned it. Another thing is towards the end of the movie when a Tim just comes out of nowhere and summons Mahad and bam, just one-shots Aigami or Cubic Aigami. But as I said before, they're visually pleasing. The background of the movies were beautiful. I'm a huge fan of backgrounds. You can tell in the videos when I do my highly edited videos, I use backgrounds, so I pay a lot of attention towards the backgrounds, especially during the Aigami and Amani and Sarah scenes where it's flashback to the younger days and they're in Egypt and they're starving. You can look at the blue colors that contrast with their costumes. It's just like white, blue, just very vibrant, colorful things, and there's like a lot of glares and stuff. I just love it. Like, I love those type of backgrounds. The worst thing about this movie is the first act. The first act was kind of for me, but once it came down to the second and third act, I was like, this is a good film. Besides the first act sort of being bad, I wouldn't say there's a lot of other issues that I have with this movie, but I want to talk about the other characters being utilized. Now, Aigami was utilized well. Of course, Aigami and his friends were utilized well. Manny and Sarah, the Piranhas as well. Yugi's friends were sort of utilized. Bakura and Joey were utilized well. Tristan and Taya and Duke Devlin. Duke Devlin was just there, of course, probably fan service, to be quite honest. Tristan sort of got the short end of the stick like Duel Monsters, but of course the dub cut out a few scenes, especially the one of Joey, or well, I should say Junochi because it's following the Japanese dub. Junochi and Honda are at the beach, and basically Junochi lost his red eyes, so Honda just knocked some sense into him. But getting back to the dub and saying the more appropriate names for this video, Tristan didn't have a good role, but I like to hear Greg Abbey And it was a treat hearing Greg Abbey, because I think Greg Abbey's probably my favorite voice actor out of all of them. I'm a huge Greg Abbey fan, so shouts out to Greg Abbey. And Taya was sort of the most lackluster out of all of them. Now, at the ending of the film, she really has this really nice scene. But besides that, she was just there to look pretty. That was basically Taya in the movie. So she really wasn't utilized that well at all. And I wish she sort of was utilized like early Battle City, when she was with the Tim on that quote-unquote date, when she was just sort of aiding a Tim for finding out his memories. But now let's get on to the main thing I want to talk about, and that's Kaiba. Kaiba was so well executed in this movie. Eric Stewart's vocal performance, the tone that he gave off for Kaiba, was very composed and insane at the same time. Constantly reinforced the fact that Kaiba wants to have a duel with a Tim, which I enjoyed. I think they did a better job with Kaiba than the sub version did. Even though I watched the sub version, I've read the spoilers over 100 times basically. I want to compare the subbed version on the Tim versus Kaiba duel, and then compare it to the dub version. Now in the sub version, it was more of a fluent conversation, while in the dubbed, it was, I need to defeat you. These scars are holding me back. That's what Kaiba says. And if I defeat you, maybe it'll lessen. And the fact is that Kaiba defeats a Tim, and one thing that lacked about this movie, and this is, I think, one of the reasons why I say the first act is kind of bad, is that in the Japanese dub, Kaiba was pissed off that this was a virtual Tim, that this wasn't the real one, and that it was making simple mistakes that a Tim would never make. While in the dub version, Kaiba was content with beating the virtual Tim, but at the same time he wasn't. He was like, this isn't the real Tim, so I'm not 100% content with it. And he doesn't call a Tim by a Tim, he calls him by the Pharaoh, which I like. I like that they called him the Pharaoh, man. It's just badass. It's like a DM, but where they called him the Pharaoh as well. But as I said before, they constantly bring up this whole I want to have a duel with a Tim, and Kaiba went through so many measures just to get this. First of all, he built a space station all the way up in space so he can, I think, hide the Millennium Puzzle from Yugi. Well, actually, no, it wasn't. Actually, thinking about it now, it's more of the ending of the film where he goes into the afterlife to get a good amount of distance to launch off and like go full speed or something like that, down into the afterlife. 4K Media also added that comedic side to Kaiba. While I most likely in the sub, he probably didn't say that many jokes. And the fact is that this comedic side of Kaiba was actually really well done. I'm not gonna lie, he did say a lot of corny jokes, but they weren't that corny. Some of them were funny. Like one was like, "You're dueling me with fruit," or something like that. And he's like, "How dare you're mocking me," which I thought was funny. This Kaiba rendition was so narcissistic. Kaiba in the dub programmed his system that was solving the Millennium Puzzle to bring up the fact that Kaiba's intelligent. Kaiba kept on saying his name, Seto Kaiba. He was narcissistic about his name, and I think a little bit of that thrived him and made him more motivated to go after a Tim. But the fact is that the main motivation for each of these characters relied on one individual, and that was a Tim. A Tim was basically the bounce board for Kaiba's motivation, Yugi's motivation, and Naogami's motivation. So I like that. And also, as I was talking about before, Kaiba being composed. When the whole world was basically about to fall under Agami's cubic form, he wasn't scared as all the other people were. And Kaiba was basically like, I'm not going to go down without a fight. Agami, you're not going to touch our dimension. What I like is that Kaiba sacrificed himself like he did in the Doma arc or the darts duel, which is very similar to DM. And he basically falls down. And Kaiba says to Yugi, call him. He basically gives a puzzle to Yugi. And prior to that, while Yugi and Kaiba were dueling, Yugi goes in the middle of the duel, basically stops dueling, goes in the middle of the duel arena and solves the puzzle, and nothing came. And this is where Kaiba's insanity shows even more, is the fact that Yugi presented evidence that a Tim's not going to return, and Kaiba was so delusional and so confused and so insane that he just sort of didn't care about that and was like, you lie. And that was also a callback to the Battle City duel that Kaiba had with a Tim. They also did another callback, and Kaiba says that, didn't the Pharaoh always say playtime is over? And I instantly knew that was a reference to episode 1 titled The Heart of the Cards. And a lot of the scenes are actually sort of little hints and references from the first episode of Yu-Gi-Oh! And some other scenes through Battle City. And it just hits me because episode 1, Heart of the Cards, is actually my favorite episode in all of Yu-Gi-Oh! Just because of the whole Exodia summon. And I don't know, like, I like that voice that Dan Green gave off of a Tim. But after it's all said and done and Naogami's defeated, Kaiba basically says to Yugi that, I told you he would return. And he says this one line, and I wrote this down. You have your bond with him and I have my bond with him. Man, I don't know. Maybe he's content with the Tim coming back to the real world. Or is he? And I'll talk about that later on in the video. But before I do that, I want to say that the Piranhas lose their power because Atim came back to the present world and defeated Cubic Aigami. Which is a good thing because at the end of the movie they're happy. Manny goes his separate ways and Aigami and Sarah are together. So it's good. It really doesn't affect their characters at all. And towards the ending of the movie, and I think it follows majority of the Japanese script. I don't know about the whole card sales thing, but Kaiba's in his Kaiba Corporation space station, and he has the Millennium Cube next to him, or Aigami's Quantum Cube, whatever you want to call it. And Mokuba's like, oh, the sales came in for the new Duel Disk. They're doing really well. And Kaiba's like, I need to concentrate. And he has his suit on. The suit basically helps him out with his whole journey to the afterlife. And Kaiba basically says that Mokuba, you have to take over. And Mokuba says, Kaiba, the prototype hasn't been fully tested. But he goes into the afterlife, and as he said, Mokuba, you're taking over. There's this huge fan theory going around if Kaiba died in the ending, and that got debunked because Kazuki Takahashi on Instagram posted a picture 4 years into the future after this movie that Yugi made his game, and basically in the beginning of the movie, he says that he wants to work on games, and we get also that Trishan's going to work for his father's factory, Teia's going to go to New York, and I don't know what Joey's was he wanted to become a pro duelist, so they all become what they want most likely. But the fact is, while Kaiba was going down in the afterlife, we see him walk, and when I saw this scene, bro, I couldn't handle it. It was just so well done, drawn. We see Kaiba walking off like a badass all the way into Atim's palace, and Atim's looking there. Kaiba sets up his Duel Disk, and Atim sort of has a glare on his face, and he just stands up and bam, cuts off right there. That's hands down the greatest ending, because what that ending does is some people are going to like it, some people are going to get pissed off, and some people want to see what happens. The fact is that, guys, that's what it's meant for. It's meant to have that ambiguous tone to it. Like Yu-Gi-Oh! Is known for doing that. 5D's ending's ambiguous. GX's ending's ambiguous. Duel Monsters ending isn't ambiguous, but it sort of has that ambiguous aspect to it. So basically, at the end of the day, Kaiba got what he wanted. Yugi, I don't know if Yugi got what he wanted, to be quite honest. Yeah, Yugi did get what he wanted because he saved Bakura, so that's sort of fair. Aigami didn't get what he wanted, but he was pure. Even though it didn't look like it was going in Kaiba's way, he still got what he wanted, and that was that duel for Atim. Now, in the Japanese version, it's that Kaiba wants to see Atim. Kaiba needs a rival forever and ever. That's what thrives him. It's basically like an everlasting rivalry between them. And so him going to the afterlife is ideal for Kaiba. That's what he wants, right? And what I dislike is that he's really arrogant. And I'm going to talk a little bit about this. I'm going to talk a little bit of shit about Kaiba. All due respect to Kaiba, though. Is that, bro, like, you know that your brother cares for you. You know you have this billion-dollar company. Now, Mokuba's set for life. Mokuba can literally throw away $1 million every day. He's set for life. He's making money, basically. So that's not an issue. But the fact is that Mokuba lost his brother. Well, he didn't lose his brother because of the whole Kazuki Takahashi image. But Mokuba's mindset's probably thinking about like, oh, what if my brother doesn't return? Because right before Kaiba goes off, he also says, Seto, please make sure you return, or something like that. So it just sucks on that portion, but it looks like Kaiba got what he wanted, and I think Kaiba fans are happy about that. But I also want to talk about Atim in this movie. Now, Atim, he doesn't have as much screen time as I thought he would. Some people told me 25 minutes, but I'm like, that's freaking bullshit. At max 10 to 13 minutes, somewhere around there. The duel was the longest thing that we had of Atim. That was clearly shoved in there for fan service, I would say. I'm gonna talk a little bit of shit about how Aigami's defeated. Is that Atim wasn't really needed in there. I feel like KT or Kazuki Takahashi just put him in there because there really is no literal sense on how Atim makes it in there. Because when you look at the scene, Yugi and Atim are one. When he draws the Mahad card, they're one. So basically, Atim's inside Yugi, as Yugi stole the vessel of the Pharaoh. And they go by that name in the dub once. But yeah, they basically shoved Atim in there. It really wasn't necessary, but I enjoyed it because I'm a Atim fan. My nitpick is that, like, alright, prior to that, Yugi shows to Kaiba that Atim's not there. 13 minutes later, he comes out of nowhere. It just doesn't make sense. And maybe when the sub version does come out, we'll get an answer to it. But I don't know, after watching the movie 3 times, I still didn't understand how he was able to come there. It just looked like he was shoved in there. But besides that, Atim wasn't really shown in the movie, and that's a good thing. That's a good thing. Even though I'm a huge Atim fan, the fact that he wasn't showed in the movie as much as I thought he was nice. 2 of the scenes I think were flashbacks. One was just a dream, and the 2 other things were legit Atim's, and that was Atim towards the ending of the film and Atim towards the early ending of the film when he came in and saved everyone. But sorry to make this review long, I'm going to wrap it up right now. I just want to say that this movie's overall good. I'm probably going to give this an 8.5 out of 10, possibly a 9. no movie deserves a 10 out of 10. There's no such thing as a perfect movie. And also this movie sort of lacks making sense in some portions, but besides that, there's really no flaws about it. And also the first act of the movie, which I disliked, but that's basically all of it. Please be sure to subscribe for more Yu-Gi-Oh content, and I'm going to be dropping a video very soon talking about how I think Kaiba was able to summon Obelisk, so stay tuned for that. Thank you, and have a great day. And also check out our Facebook fan page and Twitter fan page regarding the 6th Yu-Gi-Oh anime series, which will be in the comment section.